I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. Thanks for coming. I'm Shane Gebauer, General Manager of BrushyMtnBeeFarm, and tonight joining me I've got Kim Flottum, who is the editor of Bee Culture magazine, also the author of several books, which I think he's working on another one now, which we look forward to seeing. His most recent one was a honey handbook, which is excellent for someone that's been keeping bees for a while and wants to look at producing artisan honey or varietal honey, and also all sorts of things you can do with that honey. He's also authored numerous articles that have been published all around the world. And Kim, I think someone told me, I haven't seen it just yet, but there was one that just came out either today or yesterday in U.S. News that you were interviewed for. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that once we get started. Tonight, just to give you a little bit of background, we have these three things that you ought to know going into fall. Really, I guess how this came to be, Kim and I were talking about doing this webinar, thinking, well, what are we going to talk about? And suddenly these three things began to develop, and so really, these are three things that we thought needed to be discussed right now. But there's a whole host of other things that I'm sure we could be covering. But these three sort of surfaced, and hopefully it'll be informative and people will benefit from it. So with all that said, I'd like to just turn it over to Kim and let him say a few things, and then we'll get started.
Good evening, Shane. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be back. This is an extremely pleasant way to give a talk and to listen to other people talk, I guess. I hope you're all comfortable and enjoying yourself, libation in hand and comfortable chair to sit in. I think, Shane, what you were referring to was the end of last week, the New York Times on their webpage has a column called it's an opinion column that they have, and Open for Debate is the name of it. They invited Mae Birnbaum, who's from the University of Illinois, worked on the honeybee genome, Nancy Cox Foster from Penn State, Joe Trainer, pollination broker for Bakersfield, California, myself, and some other folks joined in, and they invited us to sort of bring the world up to date on what was going on with colony collapse disorder from our perspective. Of course, you got, and Marla Spivak was in there too. Of course, you get 5 very different takes on what was going on from each perspective. Joe Trainer is a very practical pollination expert and broker. I look at it from my perspective, the scientists, of course, from their specialties. It ended up being a very, very interesting take when you put all 5 of them together. The Times put them up on the web, opened it up, and then within a couple of days they had over 130 comments, which were equally interesting, the takes that people had on the information that they were presented. So if you want to follow what's going on with colony collapse disorder, see what's going on, go to the New York Times, to that debate column, and you can read what each person put in, and then if you want to kill another hour, you can read all of the comments that people put in. But it was fun to do, and certainly eye-opening for me. So there you go.
So if someone wanted to see that, if they just went to, I guess, the New York Times homepage, they could probably just Google or search on CCD to see that article?
That probably would show up, or Open for Debate, New York Times, Open for Debate, and Google brings it right up. And they do a different one every day, so it's now 4 or 5 days old. They leave it up for like a week or 10 days, I guess.
Great. Perhaps if I get an opportunity, I'll find that link and include it in the email that goes out to folks that have attended this. I think it usually gets sent out a day or so after the webinars, and so I'll try and include that in there so that folks can see that. Well, let's get started. we've got about, we figure around 45 minutes worth of us jibber-jabbering back and forth. And then we'll open it up for some questions. And I know people have already begun to post questions. And actually, as I'm scrolling through the questions, James, thank you, James, has posted has the link to that New York Times reference. So I've got that now. Thank you, James, and I'll certainly put that in the follow-up email. Let's talk about the three things that we've come up with anyway that sort of struck us as being important things to discuss this time of year. And one thing that I usually do, Kim, and I think I mentioned this to you, before I schedule these webinars, I go around to the folks here in the office who speak with you, our customers out there, on a frequent basis, and I ask, so what sort of questions are you being asked about? What's on people's minds? And that helps guide me a little bit in the topics that we choose. And this first one here, what do you do about small hive beetle? Hive beetle this year really has been a really hot topic for people. I think we've gotten more questions about hive beetle this year than we have in years previous. And so we thought we'd spend a few minutes talking about small hive beetle, what it looks like, how to deal with it, etc. And then I feel a little guilty here with this next one. How's your honey crop? Are you feeding? And the reason why I feel guilty is because it seems like every month I send out my e-flyer, and I constantly am bringing up this feeding aspect, and I just feel like I'm beating a dead horse. But this year in particular, and I think you'll elaborate on this a little bit, Kim, is it's been a really bad year for honey production, which is why this sort of honey crop and feeding have been paired here in this same bullet, because of course if it's a bad year for a honey crop, that means there might not be sufficient stores in that colony to overwinter on, and so we wanted to touch on that a little bit. And then, so you've harvested, you were fortunate enough to actually get a little bit of honey, and so now what do you do with the equipment that you've got, and how to go about storing it so that it's available to you and in good condition for next year. And so let's take this first one, Kim, and talk about small hive beetle. You want to start off here?
Well, you brought up a good subject there, Shane, for a couple of reasons. One is that I found it in great numbers in my apiary this year. It's the first time I've seen more than one or two in a hive ever, and I had hundreds in one of my colonies. And we'll go into the biology here in a little bit. So for me, it was appropriate that we look at this, if nothing else, just because I suddenly had to deal with it. It's easy to talk about something when you're talking about it in the abstract, but suddenly when you take off the cover and you look at 150 or 200 beetles scattering in 150 or 200 directions, and you've got to do something about it, suddenly life gets serious. So the small hive beetle, excuse me, this time of year populations are building up, unless you're in the very far south. Populations begin to build. Of course, they're building starting early in the spring and all summer. I spent some time in Georgia in July this year, and the populations were, I was told, about right where they normally are for July, and I didn't see very many of them, but every colony I looked at, I saw some. And a very interesting aspect I noticed there, and the people that I was working with, excuse me, people I was working with there said exactly right, and I'm seeing it in my colonies up here in East Ohio, is the difference between colonies in the sun and in the shade. And and as populations are building up, as they were building up in Georgia, and they've been building up in my colonies now later summer, early fall, the difference is night and day. The colonies that are in the shade, mostly in the shade, and I'm going to say probably an hour or two at the most sun during the day, and the rest of the day in partial or complete shade, have far higher populations. Did in Georgia and did do in my colonies than those colonies that are in full sun. So suddenly you've got that aspect of the biology going on. If you're looking at integrated pest management and keeping them out of your colonies or getting them out of your colonies now, boy, that should open up a whole lot of doors right there. Is if you've got your bees in the shade, you're going to want to get them out of there. Now, that also goes with some of the things going on with varroa mites and bees that are resistant to varroa mites. Sun and shade has to play some role there also, but certainly it does with beetles. So one thing is, if you can get your colony, if you're in a beetle area, or you think you might be in a beetle area, or you're buying bees from the south, and then you will be in a beetle area once they come in, full sun is certainly one of the things to look at. The picture that you're looking at there now up in the upper left-hand corner is one of the little buggers, and sometimes when you're looking at 150 of them, you think they're that big. They're about a third of the size of a regular honeybee. They're just shiny black, and they are the fastest thing in the hive. They just move at lightning speed. Down in the bottom two pictures, you're looking at the larvae, and excuse me, a lot of what you see in a colony. Excuse me, Shane, I got a frog tonight. A lot of what you see in a colony is a lot of adults for a long time, because the bees are, on a strong colony especially, the bees are able to keep them at bay. They're able to keep them away from areas that the beetles are going to lay eggs in. You've heard of the propolis prisons that they build to keep them at bay. They keep them trapped in areas away from the brood. And I'm certainly seeing that in my colonies now. They're all the colonies that I have them in are strong. They're doing well. And the beetles are located a long ways. I'm not finding any in the brood nest, any in the honey supers, none on the bottom board. They're all up on top, either the top parts of the top super or on the air cover. So a strong colony can keep the adults at bay. What happens is that when you disturb the colony, that is when you take it apart, when you start tearing it down, whenever you're examining it, you're disrupting the colony, you're disrupting the beetle population, and then beetles start running and moving, and bees aren't able to control them, and then you start getting beetles in throughout the rest of your colony, opening up the opportunity for them to begin expanding their population. That's when you start seeing what's down below, and you get the larvae. And the larvae resemble somewhat, of course, wax moth larvae. If you looking at them in these pictures, you might not want to think you even want to do this, but if you pick one up, they're firm, they're hard, and if you drag them through your fingertips, you can feel the legs, the pro-legs on them. They're prickly. They're like bristles. Where if you try that with a wax moth larvae, you just squish them. Wax moth, of course, is very soft and pliable. These guys are hard and tough and mean, as it turns out. So identification is pretty simple. When you get a big population, you're going to see them running all over the colony, and then when you see the larvae, they're going to be in the brood nest area primarily, and they're looking for protein, just like everything else that's growing. And protein, of course, is pollen and baby bees, and they eat larvae and they eat pollen, and as they tunnel through and they defecate in the hive, the process causes the honey that they are in contact with or is near what they have to ferment. Fermented honey, you know what happens when it ferments in the jars in your basement. It expands and bubbles, and when it gets really bad, it starts early cases when people didn't know what was going on and weren't able to pinpoint the problem, had honey actually running out the front door. A fairly disgusting mess. You probably won't get that on a minor infestation. You may see it a little bit. Of course, the situation gets worse as you colony for weak colonies, and you will see if you've got a nuke, or if you're in a situation where you've made a split or something, and the beetles come in and take over, they will actually, it works just the opposite. They'll keep the bees in a corner rather than the bees keeping them in a corner. And you'll see the larvae just tearing up the colony, and they essentially destroy the comb, The bees will abscond eventually, and you end up with a mess that you can't salvage, and you've just created a whole bunch of more beetles from that. So identification, knowing a little bit about the biology and the process, this is the time of year you begin to really notice populations. So when you pop that top, watch for them on the inner cover and the top bars, because they're fast. If you don't see them because you're not looking, you're not paying attention, you could miss them until they get to be really big members.
That raises a good point, Kim. You know, like you said, they are fast. They do scurry out of sight very, very quickly. They are fairly small. You can see this one up here on the comb. You know, these cells, a worker cell, which is what we've got here, are around 5 millimeters, give or take a little bit. And so you can see this beetle is just a little bit longer than the cell is wide. And so you're looking at something that's only about 5 or 6 millimeters in size, which is pretty tiny. And they are quick. But like Kim said, I think when you open up your hive, you should get in the habit of inspecting the underside of your inner cover and also right along some of the top bars, and take a quick glance before you go and set that cover down to see if you've got them. And that raises another good point that maybe we can talk about. Someone's posted a question about, you know, they're in California and they want to know, are they sort of in a hive beetle area? What is the geographic distribution of the beetle right now? You said you haven't seen them in any sort of abundance up until this year where you are in Ohio. Where I've seen them all throughout the Northeast and, of course, in the South. Are there any areas that really are beetle-free at this point?
Yeah, I guess you could answer that two ways. One is beetle-free in terms of causing damage or not causing damage. We've had them in Ohio almost since they showed up down south, and they're you know, people down there very kindly put them in packages and ship them to us. They don't fare well up here because of the winter. The winter seems to be hard enough on them that they aren't able to survive, or not very many of them survive, and they haven't become economic. As I said, I've seen them. I think I see them just about every year, but I'm looking for them, so I'm looking hard for them. But in terms of causing damage or being economically significant, no, not really until this year. We have had them in Northeast Ohio where they become established, and that's the areas that the pollinators come into the western part of the state where they are pollinating cucumbers, and they sit there all summer. Okay. So there's a population there. I don't know, and I just don't know what if there's any part of the United States that hasn't experienced them. The northern part of the U.S. certainly is having less problems with them than the south, but almond pollination has brought them to California in spite of their best efforts to keep them out, and I just don't know. If there are bees being shipped from the south to the north, they're in the north. Okay.
I think, too, I just want to make two more points. You mentioned that, you know, where you are, that they don't overwinter very well. The complete life cycle of this little bugger is such that the adults, which we're seeing in the top left, of course, lay their eggs, and the larvae wreak havoc in the colony. And then what happens is those larvae actually exit the colony and burrow into the ground, the area surrounding the hive in the ground. And that's where they complete their transformation into the adult beetles. And so soil temperature and soil type actually plays a really important role in how successful these things are in particular areas. And I think that's one reason why in the north they have such a hard time reaching any sort of level of being problem, because by the time your soil temperature comes up in the spring to be suitable for the larva to pupate into the adult, it's fairly late in the year, and then of course winter comes a little earlier, so your soil temperature drops back down again. So they've got a smaller window of opportunity, if you will, to actually reproduce successfully. The other thing to mention, and you touched on this, and I just want to take it one step further, that in a colony, generally speaking, the bees sort of quarantine the adult and prevent them from really becoming a problem. The thing to keep in mind, especially if you're harvesting honey right now or any time of year, is that when you harvest honey, you are hopefully getting the bees out of your honey supers. But you may not be getting the beetles out of your honey supers. And so you could be bringing those back to your honey house or kitchen or garage or wherever it is you're doing your extracting. And at that point, the beetles can really create a serious mess, because now they go unchecked if you don't extract that honey in a timely fashion. So if you harvest honey, I recommend that you actually extract it from your frames within about 3 days after harvesting, just so that you don't lose your precious crop to something like what you see down here, which is just it's just an awful mess, and you don't want to see that there. Did you have anything else to add before we get into sort of controlling methods of control, Kim?
One of the things that early on people were, well, two things. One of the things that people early on were thinking is that the life cycle, as you put it, the larvae leave the colony and burrow to the ground, so they think, well, I'll just surround my colony with material that they can't burrow into, carpeting or cement or I had one experience up in northern New York, perhaps you've seen this too, where they crawled across a warehouse floor, probably 40 yards, and then out the door. So it's not realistic that you're going to, if they can leave the hive, they're going to find dirt, if they can, soil that they can bore into. If the soil, in fact, sandy soil soft soil tends to be more favorable than clay that we have here in northern Ohio, which again is an advantageous factor for us here.
And too, you and I talked that at that point it's almost too late because the larva is leaving the colony, which means it's already made a mess behind, and it's leaving that mess behind as it goes to complete its life cycle. And the adults are actually very, very good flyers and can travel quite some distance. And so simply doing some sort of preventative method around the colony usually is not adequate to control them within your colony. But we'll talk a little bit more about that.
A research paper came out that I read yesterday, Shane. Australia is having a very difficult time with this beast. And one of the things they were able to pinpoint that beetles can and do routinely move in an evening between 9 and 9.5 miles.
Wow.
In one evening. So protecting yourself from them by isolation is almost impossible.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's talk about, we've sort of spelled out gloom and doom, it seems. So people are thinking, oh, great, I'm just going to hang up now and go back to dinner. But let's give them some options here. Let's talk about things that they can do to hopefully control this pest inside their colony. And so really what we're talking about, what we're going to focus on here are IPM techniques, integrated pest management techniques, that don't involve the use of harsh chemicals. And the first up are these bottom board traps. Why don't, Kim, a little bit more, I think, about the one there that has the oil being poured into it. That's a new trap I know that was developed. Is he out of Alabama, that gentleman that built that? Or somewhere in the southern states.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest, I've forgotten where. I met him at a meeting in Mississippi where he had that trap.
Okay.
So he's down in that part of the world, and if he's listening in tonight, please forgive me for forgetting this, but you can see how that trap works. It's got a removable tray. What he's doing is he's putting in a commercial cooking oil that he gets from a restaurant, mm-hmm. and which is essentially free. It's very effective at drowning mites. It doesn't evaporate very fast. The trays are deep enough such that getting that colony perfectly level is less of a problem than it is with the other tray trap. And Shane, help me out here. The first one that came out was the one down in Florida, and the name of that one was.
You mean this one right here?
Yes. Yes.
This is the West Beetle trap.
Okay.
And then this one over here is produced by, I don't know if it has a formal name, but it's Freeman, I believe is his last name. So Freeman,
exactly right. Freeman
is making this, and it really is basically a modified Varroa screen or ventilated bottom board, if you will. But you're exactly right. The deepness of this tray allows for a little bit more ease in terms of sloshing. The other thing is that it's easier to get this tray out, this tray right here, out from underneath the hive, as opposed to this one, which actually this West Beetle trap, I understand, is being discontinued. I think there's enough competition from other types of traps that it's not economically feasible to produce it anymore. And frankly, it's a very good trap, but it's awful difficult to use. You've got to put on these extra spacers to elevate your hive body so that this thing can slip underneath it. And then also, you imagine your hive body sort of sitting right across the front here. It makes it very difficult to actually get this tray out to clean it. So this Freeman trap is a great improvement, I think, over this. But you've already mentioned that levelness is a really important factor.
It is, and the other thing that the Freeman trap does, you can see, it's very similar to a lot of the Varroa traps on the market, in that tray is removable. You can keep your colony on a screen bottom board, which that is. Take the plastic trap that the oil's in out of there and put it in another colony. So you're buying screen bottom boards anyway, in all likelihood. So the only thing you're really doing is moving that trap. So it does. If you don't have a whole lot of colonies, you don't need very many of these. And the cost, once they figured that out, all you have to do is have that tray. The cost went down significantly, and the ease of use went up. So if this is something, if you don't move your colonies and you think this might work for you, this is definitely a way to go. No harsh chemicals, pretty easy to manage, and doesn't have to be perfectly level. So it's a good trap. I want to interject here, Shane, real quickly, is that it's interesting in how many traps have come up in the last even 6 months. Something happened in the water down south or something, because suddenly a lot of people got real creative or pushed into figuring out how to handle small hive beetle, because there's been a remarkable number of traps that have come on the market. You wanted to go to the next slide?
Sure.
And take a look. Do we need to talk any more about this one, these two?
The bottom board traps?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you, Kim. I don't really enjoy either one of them, but just because they are sort of difficult, I think to use. And I guess the Freeman trap has an advantage that it does function as a screen bottom board, which is useful for Varroa. So it does serve a dual purpose like that. But I think there's some better, a little bit easier options out there.
Yeah, the one you're looking at in the bottom, kind of the bottom right-hand corner there, the Hood trap. Dr. Mike Hood in South Carolina envisioned this one and got it to work and put it together. It is still remarkably successful. I think it's just a box that sits on an empty frame on the bottom bar. It's got 3 compartments in it. 2 of them hold either oil or vinegar or a bait, and then one of them holds a bait to get beetles to come in there. It has the advantage in that it's removable. You put it in the colony. When it's full of dead beetles, you take the top off and dump them out and start all over again. So you can use it over and over and over, and you can use it in different colonies. It's remarkably inexpensive. I think you have it for sale, don't you, Shane?
Yeah,
and
it's actually for sale this month, and gosh, I'm embarrassed. I don't know quite what the sale price is, but it's about $5 or thereabouts.
And you use it once and it's paid for itself. Any of these actually, but it's still one of the better, certainly one of the earlier, one of the better traps on the market. When you put this on a frame, and this is the neatest thing about the hood trap, you're putting it on a bottom bar, and the whole rest of the space in the frame is empty. Now bees will obviously fill that space up with something, and what they fill it up with, of course, is drone comb. So you've got a frame that's acting dual purpose. It's continuously trapping mites, and it's continuously trapping varroa. To me, I mean, you're killing two birds with one stone here. This is really, really a good idea, and it does work remarkably well. You can see the drone comb on that frame there, and you can see the fluid in the trap there, and it just sits in your colony. Of course, you want to put it. Both the beetles and drones occupy the same part of the brood nest, kind of out towards the edge. The adult beetles. So that's what you're looking for. It seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, I just really love this slide. You know, we've talked previously about drone trapping, and you know, a lot of people when they buy this initially say, well, you know, I'm sort of wasting a frame, but I beg to differ. I mean, this is a great utilization. It's really combining two IPM techniques into one single frame, and so it's really a win-win. This picture, Kim, that you provided here is just a fantastic illustration of that.
I wish I could take credit. Jennifer Berry took the picture.
Okay.
The picture next to it is a new frame on the market called the Beetle jail, and you can basically see how it is. It's got an insertable plastic cage on the bottom of it. It's got a slot on the top, and it's tight to the edge so beetles can't get down between the frame and the sewer. And so the only place they got to go is they run and hide in that slot. They fall into the slot. The plastic container is full of oil. It's easily removable. You lift up the frame, pull out the container, dump it out, put new oil in, and slip the frame back in. It is taking up the place of a frame, a whole frame, and it doesn't have the advantage of being a drone trap for varroa, but it does have the advantage of it holds a lot of oil and you don't have to move it very often. So, you know, it's kind of a trade-off there. If you want to put it in and leave it in, pretty much you can all season long. You don't have to, you know, you may have to take it out once. Or the hood trap you're emptying, you know, quite often, you know, a little bit more often anyway. The plastic is a little bit fragile in this model, and I'm not sure why the manufacturer chose that, but the frame it's sitting in is remarkably tough to protect it, so I think it's probably doing okay. I've got one in my hives now, and it's trapping beetles. It works, as does the hood and some of the others that we go. So from experience, I can say, yep, beetles go in and don't come out.
And that's what we want. I had a terrible time trying to envision how this thing actually worked, other than obviously there's a slot here, and that's where the beetles go in. And as you mentioned, it fits tight sort of against the outer edge of the hive body, so beetles can't hide down in there. But underneath this, you said that there's, I guess, underneath this top bar here, that slot sort of enters into to this tray right here, which is removable, but it has sort of a very special shape to the underside of that slot that really prevents those beetles from leaving. So it's not just simply another slot on the underside of this piece of wood. Is that correct?
That's correct. The manufacturer went to a lot of trouble to make sure that worked exactly right. The same piece of the same plastic container fits in a shallow, medium, and deep frame. So the wooden part on the top, where it says Beetle Jail, is small, medium, or large, depending on the frame that you have it in. And as a result of that, the underside of that slot is a very special curve, to the point where he had to patent it, as I understand it, so that the beetles couldn't climb up and just simply climb back out that slot.
Mm-hmm.
my experience is that beetles go in and they don't come out, so whatever it is he's doing, it must be working.
It's working. And two, it's worth noting that, like you said, it comes in 3 different sizes, so if you wanted to, you could get the shallow version, put it in your hive, and they would do this sort of thing, build a bunch of drone comb on the underside of that, and so you could, again, incorporate 2 IPM methods into one single frame spot, which would be trapping the beetle using the beetle jail, as well as doing some drone trapping and thus mite removal using that method as well.
Right.
So that's a nice feature.
Yep.
How about these things? What are your thoughts? What are your experiences with the frame style of traps?
Again, basically the same thing. The one on the top, the Beetle Eater, I believe it's called.
AJ Beetle Eater.
Yep.
This one right here.
Developed by people in Australia. Like I was saying earlier, they're having a dickens of a time with this thing down there, so it's not surprising that a good idea came. It's 2 pieces. You can see the top comes off, and the tray underneath is filled with oil. The tray fits down between the top bars of a frame. The top ridge there then holds the tray in place. When beetles run on the top bars, and this is taking advantage of what we talked about earlier of adult beetles being on the inner cover and on the top bars where the bees keep them. So when they're moving around, they're going to come into contact with this much more, into contact with the traps much more because they're up above. The beetles run in the slots, they fall into the tray, the oil's down there, and they drown. When it's full, you pick the trap up and take the top off and empty them out. The trap down below, you can see somebody's fingers just holding it. It's essentially the same thing with it's one piece. It's a black plastic top with holes in the center that hold the tray beneath, between the top bars and down into the frame. The beetles running across the top bars find the holes, dive down into the holes, and then rather than go between frames or going into the oil, you can see how many beetles are in that trap down there. It's just incredible. This one is brand new. Brand new. I don't even think it's in your store yet, is it?
No, it's not. I've got the samples in house, and I think he hasn't even really begun producing it yet, except for the few samples that he sent you and myself and some other folks.
Well, it's the AJ Beetle Eater is reusable, and there's a value to that. You can take it, empty it, and reuse it. The one below is disposable. It's one piece. You can't take the top off without wrecking it. So when it's full, you fill it up with oil. When it's full, you throw it away. The amount of plastic in there is so minuscule. I'm going to wager that there's more plastic in one of the pesticide strips that we use than there is in this thing. It's tough. It's made out of the stuff that they make blister packs out of, so it's almost indestructible. The only downside I see to both of them is that they are shallow, and as a result, oil spills out of them very easily. So you have to exercise a lot of caution when you're removing them or when you're putting them in if they have the oil. And the other thing is that you can see the top of the one on the bottom is completely flat. Beetles will hide under that. They won't go into the holes. They'll go underneath the flap between the top bar and the flap, and they'll hide under there. Eventually it gets propylized down and they can't get in, but for a while it does provide a good hiding place.
Yeah, that's one. Well, first off, you can actually sort of see a tiny little bit of a lip right there that would create that hiding place that you mentioned right here at this end. You can sort of make that out just a little bit. But the one issue that I've had with the AJ Beetle Eater is that, as you mentioned, this tray right here sort of fits down in between the frames, and then the comb sort of straddles across to hold it like this. Well, what happens is the bees will actually propolize this comb a little bit and actually prevent the beetles from being able to enter into the trap. And then, of course, you've got the cleaning issue if you want to reuse that trap, you've got to clean out all the little comb teeth here to make sure that the beetles are able to pass through it and get into the trap. That's one advantage. While I don't really like things that are simply disposable, a one-use product, that is one nice thing about this, is that you can sort of make out these little holes, right here through the plastic, that it's a one-shot deal, and so you don't have to worry about the bees propolising that, because by the time they do, you've trapped a good portion of the beetles, and the trap has served its purpose. As you can see, all the beetles in here. So that's one nice thing, I guess, about the disposable variety.
They both have their advantages.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This one certainly, the disposable one certainly has a cost advantage. It's probably about a quarter of the price of the next closest, which would be the AJ Beetle Eater. Both of them, I prefer these, I think, just because they're ease of use. They're right there on the top bars. You don't have any specialized equipment. You don't have to worry about sliding a full tray that could sort of be heavy with oil. These are really nice traps, I think. Now this slide, Kim, I threw in here. I'll confess that I was going to leave it out initially. And then you and I talked about it, and I realized what this actually is, and I was flabbergasted. And so, can you describe? The picture's a little bit fuzzy, but I think we'll be able to understand once you give us a verbal description of what it is we're actually looking at here.
What you're looking at is a container that's that you buy at a hardware store that holds screws or nuts and bolts, or one of those with a divider in it. And again, this was developed in Australia. And what the people have done is, you can see the holes in the top of the trap, and those holes are exactly, let's see, I've got it here someplace, 5/32 of an inch wide. So you just get a drill bit for 5/32. Beetles can go in, bees can't. They filled in each of those containers, those divisions, with something called diatomaceous earth, which is used in a variety of, a whole lot of places, insect control being one of them. It's good for insect control because it's very sharp edges. It's a very fine powder, very, very fine powder, and it has very sharp edges. Insects walk through it, like beetles or cockroaches or any insect. Their cuticle is scratched by those very sharp edges, and very soon they desiccate and die. And that's the idea behind this. What you're looking at, those chunks of things, are not chunks of diatomaceous earth. Those are small hive beetles that have gone into the 5/32 hole, gotten mired in diatomaceous earth, struggled to get out, couldn't get out, and desiccated and died. And you can see how many hundreds and hundreds are in that container. Diatomaceous earth is certainly non-toxic. It's contained in the container. It goes either on the top bars or on the bottom. It works in both locations, like any of the other traps that we've looked at, and it's certainly not toxic. It is not, I believe, registered for use in a beehive in the U.S. yet, although I'm going to believe that it's generally regarded as safe, and probably people won't have any trouble getting it registered for use. But I brought it to show people that there are minds thinking along other ways, and this is a very effective trap. The people in Australia, where it is legal to use, are very pleased with the technique. So when it's full, you empty it out, you pull in more diatomaceous earth, you put it back in the colony, and no muss, no fuss, no bother, and lots of dead beetles.
Yeah, I think it's first off, it's worth noting that diatomaceous earth is used in a lot of filtering applications, and it is considered a non-toxic substance. You can pick it up at most pool supply places because a lot of pool filters use it. No?
Actually, what you want to do is do food-grade diatomaceous earth.
Food-grade diatomaceous earth, okay.
And the pool stuff has other stuff added to it.
Okay, good to know. And I guess that's actually a very good segue into my next point, which is there's a lot of things that are being used out there. Some of them, such as this, diatomaceous earth, which is a nice non-toxic option, but some of the things that are being used are not quite as benign, and so it's very important that that you do a little bit of homework and understand before you do it. And certainly label is the law, and as Kim said, this isn't technically registered, but I'd hazard a guess that most bee inspectors wouldn't give you a hard time if they stumbled upon it in your colony. And if by chance these IPM techniques are not working for you, there is, of course, the fallback. But I think both Kim and I agree that you should try every attempt at some of these IPM techniques before resorting back to chemicals. This picture right here is the only in-hive pesticide that's registered for hive beetle. It's Checkmite. This is a plastic Corex sheet with a strip of Checkmite cut in half and stapled to it. And the premise here is that you take this sheet. This would be the underside of it. So you put the Checkmite strips down and slide it in on your bottom board, and the beetles sort of walk down these corrugations, come in contact with the strips, and thus are killed. The bees, however, can't get through those corrugations, and so they don't come in contact with the strips. But again, I would encourage the use of some of the IPM techniques. And this is Guard Star here. We talked about, you know, the life cycle of the small hive beetle and how the larvae leave the hive to go finish their pupation in the soil. This is a soil drench that you can put around your colony to kill any larvae. The problem with it is that you've got to reapply after rainy weather. And also, as we have already mentioned, by the time the beetles leave the hive, what they're doing really is leaving a mess behind. And so you've perhaps prevented a few beetles from reaching adulthood, but you haven't necessarily saved your colony, and certainly you haven't done anything for those adult beetles, which Kim mentioned can fly reportedly 9 miles. And so you haven't done anything to try and control those in your colony. So those are the hazards and drawbacks of these products. Did you want to add anything?
Just briefly, Shane, another technique that works similar to Guard Star are the garden nematodes that are available.
Okay.
People can populate the area around their hives with nematodes that are almost species specific. They certainly go after beetle larvae. Beetle larvae enter the soil, the nematodes go after them. That's the only thing they eat. You don't have to worry about standing on them. They won't take your shoes off. And they are effective, but again, you may be a little late. But if you've got colonies that never ever move, you know, establishing a population of nematodes in your bee yard might not be a bad idea.
Okay, Kim, I just glanced at the clock, and it's about 5 minutes or 10 minutes to 7. So we've been going on hive beetles here for quite a while, and we have yet to talk about the honey crop and feeding. And maybe we can sort of breeze through this a little bit more quickly, since again, you know, I've sort of been beating people over the head about feeding. So that we can get to the last section, which is how to store your equipment, because I know a lot of folks have some questions about that. All I think we were hoping to do here is just illustrate some different types of feeders, but really the point needs to be made that this year, by and large, and Kim, you would probably have a better sense than I, but pretty much across the nation, the honey crop has just been absolutely pitiful this year. And of course, if the honey crop is that bad, that means the stores in your colony may be really depleted. And so you really need to think about feeding and ensuring that the colony has sufficient stores to overwinter on. And how you go about doing that is a lot of personal preference. There's a lot of pros and cons to the different types of feeders. But you certainly want to make sure that that they've got enough reserves. And really the two options there are corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, or you can mix up your own sugar syrup, which is just simply taking sugar, white sugar and dissolving it in water. And going into fall, you want a ratio of about 2 to 1, 2 parts sugar to 1 part water, so that the syrup's not going to ferment in the colony, and they have less processing to actually store it. If you're making up your own, generally speaking, first off, the bees are not that fussy, so if you're off a little bit on your proportions, that's okay. But also, you want to boil your water, but don't add the sugar until you've taken the water off the heat and it's cooled down a little bit. Otherwise, you can actually caramelize that sugar, which creates problems for the bees when they ingest that syrup. And I'll just talk real quick about entrance feeders. Kim and I went on a little bit earlier in the week about pros and cons of entrance feeders, and well, I don't want to speak for you, Kim, but I think we both agreed that they certainly have their place and they certainly have their benefit, but they're really subject to robbing, and so you have to be very careful about monitoring for that sort of behavior and reducing the entrance so that the bees aren't, robbing bees aren't able to sort of just sneak around the corner, so to speak, to get into that feeder. And this feeder right here is nice. You can see the level of the syrup, so you know when you need to refill it, but you also have to have your colony nearly perfectly level, otherwise the syrup can sort of drain out of it a little bit. Now, if the bees aren't clustered, they're able to deal with that usually, but it can create some problems. And then, of course, we've got division board feeders here where it's inside the colony, less likely to promote robbing. In a very nice way to feed, but you sort of have to open up and expose the bees, the colony, to refill them, and if you want to put them down in your lower brood chamber, you've got upper chambers perhaps to deal with, so most people just simply put them near the top so they don't have to deal with that. Kim, did you have anything you wanted to add about these types of feeders or just feeding in general?
The only thing, I know you've got some more feeding styles coming up, but the only thing I would throw in very quickly is if it's a bad honey year, it may be a bad pollen year. And if you try feeding a protein supplement and they take it, they needed it. If they didn't take it, they didn't need it. It's real cheap insurance. So don't neglect the protein.
That's an excellent point. Actually, Steve Forrest, the owner of Brushy Mountain, commented to me last week that he's been feeding patties and he's real impressed with the strength of his colonies right now, which he attributes to the patties that he's put on there. Here are just two other types of feeders. I'm not going to dwell too much on them. A pail feeder that you can put an empty box around, and then your telescoping top can go on top of it. And the bees come up through the oval of the inner cover to feed through a little screen that's in the lid of the pail. The nice thing about these is that when you're not feeding, you can actually use the pail to collect all your scrapings. This is a baggy feeder. If you're looking for a cost-effective option for feeding, this is definitely it. All it is basically a rim that goes around the top part of the hive, and as you can see, this is just a Ziploc bag. I did dye the liquid in there a little bit, so that's not off-color syrup or anything. Just to get a little contrast. The nice thing here is that you could scoot it over to one side, so you have your bag on one side, and as Kim just mentioned, you could put your patty on this side, so you could be feeding both the patty, the pollen, or protein supplement at the same time you're feeding your liquid. And this is actually my preferred method of feeding the hive top feeders. This is a plastic style. You can see a cutaway here of one of the corners. The bees simply come up from underneath. They go over the wall and sort of down and feed on the syrup that's behind this white partition. So your syrup's over in this portion. The important thing to note about top feeders is that, of course, all your upper entrances ought to be closed. Otherwise, robbing bees can come in and have a heyday with the feeder. This is a wooden style that we make. You can see they've got these floats in there that are right on top. that are giving the bees a platform to walk on. The nice thing about this is that you can have a float on one side. Here the person's filling up this side with syrup. I'd recommend taking the float out before you did that so you don't submerge it like they've done here, and it will eventually come up to the surface, but perhaps maybe not before bees get in there. But you can put syrup on one side, and again you can put a patty or some other protein supplement on the other side if you'd like, or use both. You can also use these for a water source during the summertime, which is nice. So certainly make sure you've got enough food in the colony. Nutrition is something that we've been harping on in past webinars and in my e-flyer, that nutrition is I think, one of the most underrated aspect of beekeeping, and probably one of the sources that contributes to a lot of our problems, but we actually attribute our problems to something else, usually varroa, where nutrition can have a lot of benefit and can really promote good health in that colony. And with that said, Kim, unless you have anything else you want to throw in there about feeding, we'll jump right into stored equipment.
Go ahead and jump.
Jumping. So stored equipment. Kim, why don't you tell us what we're seeing here?
This is what a lot of us end up with doing, is just kind of stacking it in the garage because I got to get it out of the way and the car's got to get in there, and you know, and before you know it, it's too late, and suddenly wax moth has taken over everything, or hopefully not small hive beetle. This is my picture just went away. Here we go. This is stacked down south. The tops of these brood chambers are open. You can see the 4x4s are stacked on top there, and it lets light and air into the supers, and if there's frames in some of those, into the frames, and light and air are the two things that you need to combat wax moth infestations. There's certainly better ways to do it, but in a quick and dirty way, this seems to work. The picture on the right there, Shane and I got mixed up, so that's showing you those beetle traps that we had there earlier. Oh. But the picture on the left is, again, just getting light and air into your equipment. Can you go to the next one, Shane? Ooh. Maybe not.
There we go.
There. There's maximum light and air. This is a picture by Ross Conrad, the author of Natural Beekeeping and one of the contributors to our magazine. You're never going to have a problem with wax moth in a situation like this. He lives up in Vermont, so he's going to have winter, and when they hang there in the winter, you know, you're not going to have a mouse problem, you're not going to have a wax moth problem, you're not going to have any kind of a problem at all. It keeps the weather off from them, and it's an ideal way to store them. If you switch it one more time, Shane.
I really like this one.
This is a rack invented or envisioned by a guy named Serge Lebescott in California, and you can see it's made out of PVC pipe or just pipe and cement blocks. And I'm betting that of all of the people that are watching this right now, they can see, I can see how I can make that bigger and better and hold more supers. But again, the principle is light and air between the frames and the supers, and over the top is the corrugated fiberglass roof held in place by either more pipe or 2x4s or something. Now, he lives in California, and it's a little bit drier there than it is certainly where I am. But this works where I am because we put one up a couple of years ago just to see what would happen, and it worked just fine. I didn't have a problem with mice. I didn't have a problem with wax moth. The only problem I did have really was leaves blowing, and Serge doesn't have that problem. But I did get leaves, you know, collecting between the supers in there, but it didn't cause a problem, and they're easy. And you know, after that, I could see how. But again, it goes back to light and air between the frames and between the supers. And if you can, no matter how you put this together, if you can guarantee that, wax moth are going to be almost no problem at all. I'm not going to say no problem, but considering the fact that you've got one more choice here, Shane, which is your next one, I believe.
Yeah, which is sort of the method that's been used. It's sort of the quick and easy method, which is Paradichlorobenzene, or Paramoth in this case. And this is just a device that has been designed to sit on top of a stack of supers, and this drawer sort of easily pulls. Ooh, getting a little crazy there with the highlighter. Pulls in and out to recharge with the crystals. But you know, there's a lot of people that like this, but there's a lot of ways that you can deal with stored equipment that don't necessarily involve this specialized piece of equipment, and also the purchase of paradichlorobenzene. It's important to note that this paramoth smells a lot like mothballs. But it is not your traditional mothballs, which typically have naphthalene in them, which readily is absorbed by the wax and is toxic to honeybees. So you don't want to go to the hardware store and simply get mothballs, because you may be buying that type of the naphthalene type. But if you do happen to find paradichlorobenzene type of mothballs, typically, the ones that are sold in hardware stores, again, have additives, and that may cause problems, do cause problems for honeybees, and so you do want to stick to something like this that's been specially formulated for the use in stored beehive equipment. It's important to note too that this is for stored equipment. This is not used on an active colony to try and alleviate a wax moth problem. Generally speaking, a good strong colony will take care of that. With all that said, I mean, you know, this is obviously stuff we sell. I'd love to sell it to you, but I'm going to jump back to this because I just love this slide. I think this is wonderful. You know, when I was living up north, I built a garden shed with a specially designed roof that created a nice big overhang where I stored all my equipment. And again, you mentioned this, Tim, that in the north, you don't have as much of a problem. Anything below 32 degrees is sufficient to kill all forms of wax moth, the adult, the larva, and the eggs. Now, of course, it's got to be a prolonged period of 32 degrees, which you guys get up there pretty early, and it's sustained for quite some time, of course, during winter. And so really, if you wanted to, you could probably stack it like this, and once you had your big frost and prolonged freeze, you could probably take it and stack it neatly in some place where it might be a little more protected, and you wouldn't have the issue of leaves sort of clustering there. And as long as you didn't have mice going into it, you sealed it from mice. So I just love this method. I think this is great.
We didn't have a problem with mice either, and the reason is because it's not protected. There's no place for mice to go to be out of the elements. There's light and air. Same thing with wax moth. So for us, it worked pretty well. Good.
Well, that concludes all the slides. I'm going to leave this one up just because I like it so much. Kim, we've got a bunch of questions that have come in, and I've sort of been going through them a bit and trying to address them as best as possible through our conversation, but we've missed some inevitably. So let's just take these. Let me scroll down to where we start. One question that's sort of in here as a common thread is, so they see one or two hive beetles. Should they be treating? At what point do they start to really become concerned about hive beetle? You know, last time we had you here, we talked about sort of how many mites you needed to see before you considered intervening or treatment in some fashion. So how many hive beetles do they need to see before they're concerned?
Well, I have enough experience with them up north to be able to give you a good answer. I can tell you what the people down south were telling me, and this was in north central Georgia, so that tells you the area that it was in with fairly poor soil, so the beetles were able to do well. When they start seeing, and I challenge you to measure this, when they start seeing more than enough, they start doing something. And I don't know how more than enough is, but they said, you'll know when you see them. Okay. Given that, if I am on the 4th of July opening a colony and I am seeing 2 or 3 beetles on an inner cover of top bars, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be doing next year. I'm going to be putting one of those disposable traps in my colony, and I'm going to bet that very soon somebody's going to come up with a way to put a trap in, and in 5 days measure the number, count the number of beetles, and once you get to a dozen, you know that you need to do something else or some threshold. I'm going to bet that that's going to happen because this is very similar to the sticky board for Varroa. So, you know, next year if I see a trap's going on, I mean, there's no residue that I'm putting in my colony. There's no poison. I'm not hurting the bees. I'm not hurting the wax. I'm not hurting anything but beetles. So that may be initial overkill next year, but I'll know a year from now how it works. How's that?
That sounds good. I think for me personally, I guess it's sort of difficult to answer that question. Where we are here at the business and where I live, which is just a mile or so down the road, the soils really are not conducive for the reproduction of the hive beetles. So certainly we've seen them in our colonies. We know they're there, but we're not in an area that really tends to have a problem. And I think, you know, we've mentioned this before, that if you've got a good strong colony, they tend to chase them around and prevent the beetles from really running amok. And I think that's one of your first lines of defense. And then also knowing a little bit about your area and how well they do there. You know, I know there's one place in Georgia that has a terrible time with hive beetle because they're near a major compost pile from a commercial melon farm, and fruit can be a secondary host. Rotting fruit can be a secondary host to hive beetles. The hive beetles will actually lay their eggs, and the larva can survive just fine on that rotting fruit. And so it's like this perpetual source of hive beetles that just go out into the environment and decimate the surrounding colony. So if you're in an area like that, of course, that's a different situation than if you're up here on Brushy Mountain and they don't do very well. So being in contact with other beekeepers, perhaps more familiar beekeepers that have been in your area a little bit longer, could be a real asset to you. And a bee association is an excellent way to come in contact with those folks and share stories and experiences. And they might say, well, I've seen them in my hives for years now, and I've never had a problem with them. And that'll tell you something. That doesn't mean that you won't, but it'll tell you something, and sort of you can gauge your level of concern then. Another question that seems to be fairly frequent here, Kim, is, you know, we showed the slide of the slimed frame. What do you do with that? Is there any salvaging that frame?
I'm told no. I haven't got to the point where I've had to deal with one on either a wax melter or anything like that yet. The bees don't like the honey. They don't like the wax, I'm told. I don't have enough experience to know other than what people have told me. So what have you seen down there, Shane?
I know of one person that had a wood frame with wax foundation slimed. Of course, the bees would not go anywhere near the comb. They just will not go anywhere near that slimy mess. They'll just ignore it, which of course is not a good thing to have in the colony. So if you're looking at that situation with a wood frame, wax foundation, you've got to basically cut the comb out. You've got to scrub that frame because that fermented odor persists, gets absorbed by the wood, and that creates some problems for the bees. If it's a plastic frame, it's a little bit easier. You can scrape off that slimy mess and scrub it down and reapply a layer of wax, and the bees will take to that. But generally speaking, from what I've seen and heard, if you've got a wooden frame with wax foundation, you're easiest and best option is just to write it off and start with new equipment, because the cleaning of it's a real mess, and often, not, I shouldn't say often, sometimes does not do the trick to get the bees back onto that equipment. That's what I've heard from folks. There's one question here that I'd like to take a minute with. They ask about formic acid, which is the Mite-Away 2 product, and does Mite-Away 2 affect the beetles? I'm wondering, Kim, if you've heard anything. I've heard some anecdotal evidence that while it does not kill them, it does interfere with their ability to reproduce a bit. Now, I have not seen any scientific data on this. I don't know of any researcher that's looking into this, but I've heard this from a couple different sources. If I just jump up here, one thing that I do know about formic acid and how it affects mites is that it might not kill the mite outright, but it actually scorches their antenna a bit, so they have a hard time navigating within their hive, because of course they're sensing the odors in the hive through their antenna. And basically it's sort of like singeing your eyebrows. They singe their antenna. The formic acid singes their antenna so they can't reproduce as well. Now, I'm wondering if something similar might be happening. They sort of singe. I guess singe probably isn't the most appropriate term, but it destroys their sensory their receptors on their antenna a bit, so it impedes their ability to sort of do what they do, which is reproduce in the colony. And again, I don't have any data on this. It's all anecdotal information, but I'm wondering if you've heard anything or encountered anything in your travels or research.
I have even less information on this than you do, Shane. I've never even had, I've not had anybody ask me, or I never considered that as an option. It's a good question. I'm going to find out.
Great.
But not tonight.
Well, when you get that answer, please let me know, because I have yet to find anything conclusive on it. Like I said, I don't know anyone that's actually looking into it. Let's see if we've got any other. There's lots of other questions, some of them not necessarily related to our conversation tonight. Let me just see if there's any sort of can you leave a beetle trap in year-round, or would you take it out in the wintertime? I guess they don't mention a specific type of trap, but what would you do there? Would you leave it in or take it out? All
of the tray traps, of course, are going to get filled with junk. So that kind of answers that question. But those little disposable traps, or the frame trap, the beetle prison, the beetle jail, the disposable traps, they'll just fill up with dead beetles. The oil will eventually encompass all of them. I don't see any issue. They're so shallow that they don't take up hardly any comb space. So you're not losing comb space to them. You're not going to get your cluster isn't going to move all the way to the top, and if it does, they'll just edge around the side. I don't know why you can't leave them in all winter. I say that carefully because I don't know why you can't leave them in all winter, but I don't see them being a problem. Mm-hmm.
Purplizing would be the only issue that I might see, but I guess in the wintertime, I guess, well, depending on where you are, certainly up in your neck of the woods, the bees probably aren't doing a whole lot of purplizing. They're just hunkered down trying to make it through winter. There's, I don't know if you've encountered this, and maybe it's urban legend, but I've heard that there's a video out there, and I want to say, well, I don't want to associate him with this urban legend if it's not true, but of a hive beetle actually milking, so to speak, a honeybee in a cluster in wintertime to get it to feed that, getting the honeybee to feed the hive beetle. Have you heard about that?
That's not urban legend. That's exactly right. The researcher, he's a grad student in Georgia and moved to Florida. What's his name?
I thought it was Jeff Pettis, but obviously that's incorrect.
I think that's incorrect.
Okay.
The researcher he did his work under Keith Delaplane on small hive beetle biology, and he had the video of He was the first one to sort of discover the propolis traps, the propolis prisons that the bees were building to keep the hive beetle in, and they were trapping them between top bars and inner cover, or between inner cover and cover, and just holding them at bay there. Well, the bees would come up, and they were, as they were filling in the propolis and making sure the prison was secured, the beetles, it's a trophallaxis response many insects have. They touch mouth parts to stimulate. One who wants food will touch one who has food to get them to share, and that's exactly what was going on. Is the beetles were coaxing food from the bees, and the bees, it's an innate response. It's not that they were feeling sorry for the beetles by any stretch. It's just that the beetle was doing the right thing to the right part of the bee's body to get them to give them some food. So yes, that's not an urban legend, and what you saw and heard of was correct.
Great. Just a couple of quick questions that people have here, and then we'll cut this off. They're not necessarily related directly to what we discussed this evening, but are good questions, I think. We already talked a little bit about mouse control, that there's some questions about that. What I do on mine is I actually just stack it up on a screened bottom board and just put a closure in the entrance. Once the bees have cleaned it out and I know I don't have issues with wax moth, and then I'll just put a cover on the top so that the stack is sealed. Do you recommend screened bottom boards year round? Not
Absolutely.
necessarily related, but okay.
Absolutely.
And it's again worth noting, I think, that you're up in Ohio where the wind howls and the temperatures plummet.
I haven't put covers on my screen bottom board since I've had them, and I have a friend who puts covers on his screen bottom boards. What he does is he throws a floor tile in on the bottom, which just about completely covers, but not quite, the opening that he has in there. And the bees are up in the middle of the box, and they're moving up in the winter, and the wind doesn't blow up. It may blow by the bottom board,
right.
But if if you're concerned about that, you throw a bale of hay or a couple of covers just as a wind block. Air is going to move up. The reduced stress because of poor ventilation that screen bottom boards get rid of is so far greater. It's such a benefit that I just can't imagine not having them. I think I mentioned last time A.I. Root had them 150 years ago for good ventilation, and he extolled the virtues of them then, and he was right 150 years ago.
I've kept colonies up in northern New York, where too the wind can howl, although probably not so much as in Ohio, but the temperatures certainly can plummet. And I've left my screens open all year round and had good luck with it.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the cold that kills bees, but the moisture associated with cold that really gives them a hard time, and that extra ventilation, I think, helps with it.
Absolutely.
There was a person that asked about feeding a pollen supplement. We already talked about that. I think it's a good idea this time of year because, again, as you mentioned, if there's a poor honey flow rather, or nectar flow, then chances are there could be a very poor pollen source out there for them as well. Someone's asked about Honey Bee Healthy. We talked about that, I think, back in July when we talked about getting ready for winter, that's an excellent additive to add to your syrup. And so I would recommend that. Let me just quickly scan down here and see. Here's a good question. Are there any plants that you can put around your hive that may repel the hive beetles?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Don't put watermelon around them, I guess.
Don't put rotting or composting food around your hive, because we know that that of course will bring in those hive beetles. And with that, Kim, we've been at this now for over an hour and 20 minutes. I know you're a busy person, and I've got to get ready to leave for a conference, so I've got to get home to my family. But I appreciate you spending this evening with us. The information and knowledge that you bring from your background and your day-to-day life is just a tremendous resource, and I really do appreciate you taking some time and sharing that with us. I know you're in high demand. I know you're a busy guy, and taking some time to meet with us is really appreciated. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Shane. I appreciate your comments, and for the time that all of the listeners here have sat through all of this, I hope that it's time to get up and get another beer, I think. Okay?
or in our case, go home and get the first one and relax, right?
There you go. Travel safe, Shane.
All right, thank you. You have a good one, and thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.